I'm Mike Stone. Welcome to the Tall Mike Wine Podcast. This is a weekend wrap-up edition. I don't have a guest, no interview, just me and my life in wine. I'm talking to you from my home in Novato, California. It's #MySaturdayNight. The wine from the weekend. The #sexy bottle shot has been posted to Instagram. You can see it at Tall Mike Wine. I'll tell you about the wines momentarily. First, a few things of note. We're getting busier at Nicholson Ranch, where my podcast is based, so it's been complicated scheduling interviews for the podcast. But there are things in the works, and you'll be hearing me interview another guest very soon. Some great guests in the pipeline, actually. I'm excited. But the fact that the winery is seeing more traffic should be good news to everyone, because that means people are moving around again. And pretty much everyone tells me they are, because they are fully vaccinated. It's happening. It's really happening. I'm about 3 weeks past my second dose of the Moderna vaccine myself. The light at the end of the COVID tunnel would seem to be getting brighter. Oh, and just a heads up for you if you're getting the second dose. Drink lots of water. That was my strategy to avoid side effects, and it worked better than I could have imagined. I had not one problem the day after my shot. In fact, I felt great, which tells me I should hydrate like I did more often. Maybe every day. Drink water, my friends. Now I want to talk about the podcast, which is almost 4 months old. The whole experience has been amazingly positive. What with people finding us from all over the world, we're now heard on 4 continents and in 12 countries, now that Argentina and Germany have caught on, and 31 of these United States. But with all the positives, there's reality, and the reality I'm speaking about is podcast reviews. Podcast reviews on Apple Podcasts, to be specific. I hadn't really read them regularly since the early days of the podcast, when I had a smattering of very positive reviews right off the bat, and a perfect 5-star rating. But I happened upon those reviews again recently, and wow! I've slipped from a perfect 5 stars to 4.6. It would seem we have garnered some 1-star ratings, just a couple. No reviews to go with those ratings, just ratings. How cowardly is that? Although I really don't care. If you are listening right now and happy to be doing so, I'm happy to have you. The rest is just drama. Do you want to hear about the wines I've enjoyed this weekend? Okay then. On Saturday night, prior to going out to eat for the first time in over a year, I wanted a glass of something really good. It had been a very long and tiring day at the winery and my Friday, so I opened a Cabernet Sauvignon from Washington State, from a small winery called J.B. Neufeld. This is their everyday cab, their Yakima Valley designate from 2017. I would typically consider this to be very young to open, but I needed and wanted a wine with some heft. And since I belong to the J.B. Neufeld Wine Club, I have a few of these in my collection. It was good to take a peek at this wine. It was delicious. Big flavors of red and black fruit, with a great charred oak component. Remember, I had a glass of this prior to going out to dinner. Dinner was Thai food, with which I had a beer. And when I got home, there was the remainder of that bottle waiting for me, and a bit more approachable after some time and some air. This wine has aging potential, and I'm glad I have a few more. J.B. Neufeld also makes some single vineyard bottlings and a big reserve cab, the Old Goat. Justin and Brooke Neufeld are the J and B behind the name J.B. And it was a great pleasure to meet them both late last year at the winery in Yakima, Washington. I encourage you to track them down if you want to impress your friends with a small production Washington cab. Next up, tonight's wine, which I paired with some oven-fried chicken made by yours truly. A Shiraz from my favorite Australian region, the Barossa Valley. The wines from the Barossa are heavy on the extraction. What I mean by that is these wines typically give you all the elements that the skin on the grapes have to offer. The darkest of colors, the biggest structures, and some really chewy tannins. They typically will age for a good long time. Tonight, I open a 2014 Shiraz from Barossa Valley Estate, the E&E Black Pepper Shiraz. At 7 years old, this wine is just starting to soften and turn into a real plush mouthful of red fruit with some nice herbaceous and peppery notes. And a finish that goes on and on and on. Not your average Shiraz at all. And now, a story I'm not at all happy to tell you. I received word out of Spokane, Washington, a town I consider my second hometown. I lived there for 7 years. And it was in Spokane that the transformation to tall like wine happened. When I moved to Spokane in 1995 for a radio job, I had no idea that a few years later I'd be Mike the restaurant guy and leave town a few years after that to find greater restaurant challenges in L.A. and later the Bay Area. Needless to say, I met a lot of people in Spokane. One of them called me a few weeks ago. It was an interesting and unexpected phone call. I was on a photo shoot in the Napa Valley for my boss at Nicholson Ranch, Deepak, who's been on the podcast a few times. He's purchased a new property in Yountville, and I was shooting some pictures of the place for future promotions. Anyway, on the way back to Sonoma, the phone rang, and it was Dale, a former colleague in Spokane, someone who I've always been happy to hear from, who I had hired at the Elk Public House about 20 years ago. Dale had continued working at the Elk, yes, all those years. A lot of people have worked at the Elk over the years. It's truly one of the great restaurant jobs in the world. But Dale stayed on and became a fixture in that part of Spokane, the neighborhood called the Browns Addition. In a town the size of Spokane, people in the restaurant and bar industry are a pretty tight fraternity. Dale was, by this time, an elder statesman, but in the most friendly and loving way imaginable. So Dale had called that day a few weeks ago to tell me he was moving on from the Elk. Yes, this was monumental news. But why was he calling me? He explained it this way. I'd been the one that hired him 20 years ago, and he'd already given notice to the owners of the Elk, great guys. But he wanted to reach out to me, since I had made the whole thing happen in the first place. I mean, that's giving me a lot of credit. What a thoughtful thing for him to do. Almost unbelievable, really. But there he was on my phone, clumsily gracious as always. He told me he was moving to Idaho to live with his lady love and work locally at a resort on a lake. To live the lake life, he said. I made the obligatory, come down and see me in wine country sometime gesture. And the phone call ended. I thought of Dale in the days that followed, and there were social media postings about his move, his last day at the Elk, and then the U-Haul in the driveway shot just a couple of days ago. And then, on Saturday night, after working all day at the winery, I found out Dale had passed away unexpectedly in his sleep. At the time, the details were pretty minimal, but it was certainly a surprise to everyone. Dale, a guy who was low-key, but at the same time, over the top in his living of life and his love for other people. This is a trait that's common among people in the hospitality industry, but for a lot of people, they turn it on and turn it off. Not Dale. Dale was Dale at work or on his day off. Meet him on the streets at random, and you felt a true and sincere connection. As his manager for a time, I can tell you, he was not always a model employee, but he was certainly the type of person that we all would do better knowing. Sadly, there aren't a lot of them out there. People like Dale. He will be greatly missed. With all of that being said, remember, tell your friends how much they mean to you. Don't hold back. We have a finite time allotted to us here on this earth, and that time is precious. I appreciate you finding my podcast, and I'd love it if you were to subscribe, follow, share with your friends. Join me again for more conversation and more wine. I'm Tall Mike Wine. Cheers.